proud to have this group here. On stage, we have representation from various segments in the many different industries, but primarily those who have a wealth of experience and knowledge to share with you. I'm going to introduce, starting from the far left, my left, the far right, I'm going to introduce to you Mr. Ron Busby with the U.S. Black Chamber. This is the third year Mr. Busby is here and joining us in this conversation. Just a little background on Mr. Busby. He is the president and CEO of the U.S. Black Chamber. He started his career as a business owner and had a very successful career. He started out with annual revenues of $150,000 a year and grew his business to a $15 million business in a very short period of time. He currently serves on the Pfizer Small Business Council, the National Newspaper Publishers Association Foundation Board of Directors, White House African American Leadership Council. He has also formerly served on the U.S. Small Business Administration Council on underserved communities. So please welcome Mr. Ron Busby. Ron's right to my left is Mr. Joe Velasquez. Let me get that accent in there. Joe Velasquez. Mr. Velasquez is the Senior Vice President for Bank of America. He is also an active member with NAREL, which is the National Association of Hispanic Real Estate Professionals. In his 12 years, he's held leadership positions in neighborhood lending, national business division, covering territories throughout the South and Central United States. He is a published author of the book Pursuing Success Stories That Inspire, a certified speaker by the John Maxwell team, and a certified speaker with NAREL 10. He is a past president of the North Texas chapter of National Association of Hispanic Real Estate Professionals and a former vice chair of the Dallas Housing Authority. So please welcome Mr. Joe Velasquez. Next is Ms. Margot Posey, who is the President and Chief Executive Officer of the Dallas-Fort Worth Minority Supplier Development Council. The DFW MSDC develops training and connects minority-owned businesses with opportunities and advocates on behalf of minority-owned businesses and entities committed to MBE inclusion within their buying purview. Under Ms. Posey's leadership, the DFW MSDC certified minority-owned business report revenues of $25.2 billion in 2018. And minority businesses hired and retained 50,938 jobs for major economic impact of North Texas. So please welcome Ms. Margot Posey. And last but not least,
our company is now, and Jim and Pat.
Can you hear me? Hello? Last but not least, oh, there we go. John Wong, who is the founding chairman of ARIA, the Asian Real Estate Association of America. Mr. Wong graduated from Yale University in 1975 and began his real estate career in 1981. In 2003, Realtor magazine named John as one of the 25 most influential people in real estate. In 2011, the Council of Real Estate Brokers Managers inducted John into its Hall of Leaders. He's the founding chair of the Asian Real Estate Association of America, which he helped form in 2002. So please welcome Mr. John Wong. We're going to have a conversation about several different things. We're going to talk about some of the missions that they're tasked with their organizations. We're going to talk about some of the challenges that currently exist and how they overcome that. We're going to dig into the wealth disparity that still exists. And then we're going to talk about the importance of relationships. Okay? So I'd like to begin with Ms. Margot, ladies first, about your organization and what your primary missions are.
Thank you. Yes. Can you hear me now? Okay, good. It would be good to use the mic. So the Dallas-Fort Worth Minority Supplier Development Council, our mission is to facilitate opportunities in business between corporations and public sector agencies and minority-owned businesses. The council celebrated its 45th year last year, so we're now in our 46th year. No, I have not been there all that time, okay? And in addition to the council also operates the Department of Commerce's Minority Business Development Agency Business Center for this region. On the council side, we have about 980 certified minority-owned businesses, about 100 regional corporations and public sector buying entity partners. We're part of the National Minority Supplier Development Council, which is a network of 23 councils across the country. We actually service the North Texas region. And as Vince mentioned, we do have some numbers, and I'm just going to give you a quick shout out on the numbers. In 2018, we had 939 certified MBEs versus 790 in 17. Our MBE employed more than 55,706 employees versus 50,000 in 2017. And our MBE revenues went from $22.9 billion in 2017 to $25.2 in 2018. So that's a little bit about the council.
Thank you, Margo. Mr. Wong, would you add to that?
Yeah, I would say the Asian Real Estate Association of America is now 17 years old. It's got north of 17,000 members distributed in 41 chapters across North America. 2 of the chapters are in Canada. But really the core focus and mission of what ARIA is and does is we empower Asian communities through real estate, one person at a time. So we recognize that whether it's for a consumer getting into homeownership is core to their path toward financial stability, entering the middle class. We recognize that we support this by helping real estate professionals and mortgage professionals and others serve this community better. And there are some nuances which you touch upon later about this community language of preference, etc., that we can touch. But we also have become very involved in reaching out to communities that have suffered devastating catastrophes, whether the nuclear plants in Japan, I think the hurricanes in Texas, where we have reached out and supported raising funds to help with temporary housing, etc. So really it's just empowering communities through real estate. We feel that through this particular arena, you can empower an individual to become strong, empower communities to have a voice, to be part of the growth of America.
Very good. Joe, what's going on in ARIA?
Thank you for the opportunity to be with you today. So, Joe Velasquez with the National Association of Hispanic Real Estate Professionals, known as NAREP, have been in existence for close to 2 decades. And I'll tell you briefly the way NAREP came about. 2 individuals, co-founder Gary Acosta and Ernie Reyes, one a realtor, one a lender. And after one closing one time, sitting around having coffee like they would normally do, discussing the aspects of the closing and the client. And through that, the vision came about to create and develop an organization that would promote sustainable Hispanic homeownership, which is the mission of the group, to advance sustainable keyword homeownership among Hispanic communities and others. That's been close to 2 decades now. NAREP has, we're reaching close to 100 chapters in cities all across America, over 30,000 members following that mission. And the way that NAREP actually activates or executes on the mission is really three points, so to speak. So one of them is educating the real estate professional. And when we say real estate professional, obviously it includes the real estate professional, there's lenders, there's practitioners from the insurance industry, and everybody that touches a real estate transaction. So it's providing education, it's empowering the real estate professional, because we know that when we empower each other, then we have the ability to go out into our communities and make a difference where it needs to be done. So empowerment education is one. The other is providing an opportunity for real estate professionals to come together and network within their chapters, within their local communities, and really strategize as to how to make an impact in their local communities and spread out, have that ripple effect. And then third but not least, NARP has a strong voice in Washington, D.C., where we believe we're an agent of hope. We have a voice. We bring the voice of the one that doesn't have a voice. We advocate, obviously, for our industry, things that matter to us on a day-to-day basis, things that are coming about from a policy perspective. And then also we touch on immigration reform, because we believe that is, for NAREV, that's more of an economical issue. There's an impact that immigration reform has in this country. And so having a voice in DC is critical for NAREV. There's a brand of NAREV that really came about 3 years ago that I'll touch a little bit more as we expand a little bit later. And that's a Hispanic Wealth Project that touches building wealth among families across America, and I'll be more than glad to touch on that just a little bit.
Ron, bring it on home.
Good deal. So good afternoon. Again, my name is Ron Busby. I'm the president and CEO of the U.S. Black Chambers, Inc. Actually, March we celebrated 10 years, our 10-year anniversary. In 2009, we were created out of a need, kind of a vacuum, for African American business voices in Washington, D.C. And so when we began in 2009, there were 6 chambers. Today we have over 141 chambers. We're in 42 states, including Canada, North and South Africa, Durban, as well as Morocco, as well as affiliates in China. We're based on 5 key pillars, and I think the most important one is really about partnerships. None of us can do what we do effectively alone. So for the U.S. Black Chamber, like so many of the other people that are on the panel, our primary focus is on advocacy. Based in Washington, D.C., we understand that policy really drives the decisions where our dollars are spent, as well as the priorities of the country or the state or your local community is really where the policy conversation kind of is held. And so, like many of the organizations, we're the voice of black business. Our second one is access to capital, and we've heard a lot of that being discussed today as well as this afternoon. But if you ask any business owner what their number one concern is, as well as a homeowner, they will say access to capital. But if you ask a black business what their number one, number two, as well as number 3 concern is, they will say access to capital. And so we try to build a bridge between those business owners that need the capital, as well as organizations and institutions that have the capital that's not only accessible, but affordable. And we'll talk about that as we have more length. Our third one is contracting opportunities, and we really look at that from 3 different vantage points. Where is the government spending its money, and how can we ensure that black businesses have a play there? Where is corporate America spending its dollars, and make sure that our businesses have the opportunity? And lastly, where are black people spending its dollars? A lot of people talk about the $1 trillion that African Americans have to spend, but that's usually not African Americans. That's usually someone from outside of our community saying, black people have $1 trillion. How can we market to them to get our share? Next is about entrepreneurial training. The average black-owned business's annualized revenue is $54,860 a year. Usually I get, what? $54,860 a year is what the average black firm is doing in annualized revenue. And that's because of the lack of continuing education. We have over 300,000 members. The average member that's a member of the U.S. Black Chamber is doing $1.2 million, has been in business 5 years, has 7 employees, and doing business in multiple states. Education matters, and we have partnered with other education organizations, including historically black colleges and universities and online institutions, to provide the training and the acumen that those businesses need. 95% of the firms that are doing less than $100,000 have no continuing education. 99% of those firms that are doing $1 million or more that are our members all have some type of continuing education. And then lastly, it's how we develop our chamber and community leaders to make sure that they have the resources and the acumen that they need to go back to their local communities to improve the conditions for our communities as well as our business owners.
Very good, very good. Each one of you articulated what your missions are and what you're focused on. And I look at it as you being advocates, you're fighting the good fight. Fighting to me implies struggle. Can you identify some of the struggles or some of the impediments that you encounter every day in doing what you're trying to do that you identified and you continue to wrestle with to get to your perceived goals for the year or years to come? Anybody want to jump in on that?
Let me start, I think, and I'll be analytic and academic to begin with, and I'll close with an idea that is a little more fun. But among the Asian segment, a large percentage are immigrants and individuals who grew up in a country other than the United States and whose comfort level with English is still challenged. In fact, I think a survey that we conducted just as it's about to be released is the State of Asia America for 2019. So we do this study every year, and I'm disclosing some of it, even though the official release is not for a month from now. But 72% of individuals who identify themselves as Asian in the census are more comfortable in a language other than English. So when you are in the process of going through a loan application, or in the past, even in the midst of a foreclosure, if you don't have that skill, it becomes a challenge. So ARIA is actively working on advocating for providing information in other languages so that the community can better understand the process and what they're getting into when they go through a loan application. So working with the FHFA on a project where common mortgage terms will be translated to other languages and has as an independent government resource for that. That'll help kind of stabilize, I think, the terminology that we all individually sometimes nuance and change. I think in Spanish, it's already available. Later this month, it'll be rolled out in the Vietnamese language and the Chinese language. That's kind of a basic thing. There's another challenge that we face, and it's called Crazy Rich Asians. Now, some of you may have seen the movie, and it depicts, again, it's not crazy rich, it's crazy rich. It's really super, super rich folks. And it's become very popular. Many of us in the ARIA organization are very proud of the movie because it was all Asian cast, Asian producer, Asian writer, so there was something to be said for that. But something else touched me in the movie that I think speaks to it, because there's a perception that all Asians are rich, high educated. But you think about it, the very wealthy family in Singapore, it was said in the movie, they made their riches in real estate. They came when Singapore was just nothing, an island, they built it up and became super rich. But you think about the other character, Rachel, and her mother, who escaped the United States as a single woman, didn't speak English, busted tail working in a restaurant until she became successful at what she calls herself as the top broker in Queens. It is the path that many of us have taken real estate, whether you start off up here or you start off down here. There's that commonality of gaining. So part of the ARIA's challenge is helping the regulators understand that it's not all the crazy rich. There are a lot of folks here starting out, but you give us a shot and we'll get there probably sooner than you might think.
So what I didn't say earlier was the council is probably the most diverse organization. It is the most diverse organization within our group right now because we service Asians, Blacks, Hispanics, and Native American Indians. Our 4 pillars are certification, so we certify minority-owned businesses for corporations. We're considered the gold standard of certification. When I say certification, what I'm talking about is certifying a minority-owned business that, 1, they're a U.S. citizen, 2, that they have minimally 51% equity within their business, and 3, the operational control of the business is in the hands of minorities. That's our first pillar. We also provide development and advocacy, and I'd say that probably our real wheel is connecting. We connect corporations, public sector agencies with minority-owned businesses. And to your challenge, John, I think that the council, we face basically the same, in that corporations oftentimes look at minority-owned businesses and they think that they're all small, they're not ready, they're not experts in their core competency, and there's just a myth of all the reasons why you can't do business with minority-owned businesses. And then you bring in the various cultures, and every culture is just a little bit different and has their own nuances. So we deal with all of that, and we really deal with the fact that I believe not most, but a lot of organizations do look at minority-owned businesses and they think they're minority, okay? And when I say they think they're minority, sometimes minority has, takes on the definition of less than, okay? And I would tell you, if you are a minority-owned business in 2018 and you have any hint of success, you better be better than anybody else out there on the street.
I would say, please go ahead.
There used to be this myth, I may have told this story before, but there was this myth back in the 50s that white people's ice was colder than everybody else's ice. If you've been to my speeches, you've heard me tell this story, but it's still a relevant story. You see, in our community, we believe that white folk ice was colder than ours. And there was some truth to that. So when I hear people talk about, well, minority firms aren't this or aren't that, there may be some truth in that, but it's changing each and every day with technology, with acumen, with resources and partnerships. You see, white people used to get their ice in ice boxes before there was refrigerators. And so what would happen is you'd get a block of ice delivered to your home, and it would keep your foods and your meats and fruits and vegetables fresh for 7 days. My grandfather used to deliver ice. And so he would take the ice to his white clients early Saturday morning. By the time he got it to their ice boxes, it would stay fresh for a full week. But by the time he got to the black neighborhoods and the Hispanic neighborhoods and even the Asian neighborhoods, that ice had been sitting on the truck for all day, melted down a little bit, chipped away a little bit. So by the time he got to the communities of color, that ice only lasted 5.5 days. So there was some truth to the fact that white people's ice was colder than our ice. But in today's market, that's no longer the case. You see, black people actually created the refrigerator and the ice maker. So now we can get ice that's crushed and cubed and flavored and filtered and colored ice. We can get ice as equal to or superior than anyone else. So when I hear people talk about minority-owned businesses, I say my business is superior to anybody's. And when we start seeing our businesses, our advocacy, our policies in the same vein, we don't really have to worry about what's going on in someone else's community. Now, I will tell you this. What corporate America has told the U.S. Black Chamber is, yes, we'd love to do more business with minority firms, but we either can't find them or they don't have the size and the scale. And so we have to order, in my organization, we deal with solutions. And so everybody's got a smartphone, either an Apple or Android. In my smartphone, I have a mobile directory that has 111,000 black-owned businesses. So you can't tell me you can't find this. It's GPS driven, it's industry specific. It gives you information on how long they've been in business, how many employees they have, what's their annualized revenue. So you can't say you can't find it. The second thing is, well, they don't have the size and the scale. And there may be some truth to some of that, because the average contract that MSDC has a relationship with is about a $25 million contract, if I'm correct. Well, most minority-owned firms aren't going to be able to, most firms aren't going to be able to take advantage of that. And so what we have done is said, well, let's put 2 and 2 together to make 5 or 6 or 7. So we deal with joint ventures, we deal with consortiums, we deal with buying out old white guys' businesses, because we understand that we have to deal with the reality and not what someone else said about small or minority or local or any of the other labels that have been placed on us. Our businesses have the capacity, the acumen, the skills. And what we may lack is relationships, which we are now developing here with VMR, as well as access to capital, which I hope you'll get an opportunity to speak.
In some ways, the challenges, like John was talking about, from a cultural perspective, there's one word that comes to mind, and that's assimilation, especially as we talk about it from a lending perspective. When you look at characteristics, for example, my community, from a Hispanic Latino community,
there are certain characteristics or certain rituals that don't line up to the lending platforms of the American system today. You've got still families that will have, we'll talk about down payment and then show up to the closing table with a brown bag, full of cash. And we're like, oh, hold on a second, wait up, let's go to the bank. And so assimilating into the system of the U.S. continues to be a challenge in some way. Now, obviously, as you've said, a lot of progress has been made, a lot of education that's already on the forefront, but we continue to see some of that. Now, here's the challenge: is who makes the change? Does the lending institution make the change to assimilate, to migrant communities, or does a migrant community, you need to assimilate? And so there's a balance there that I think we're continuing to evolve into. Both sides learning, how do we make lending more available to communities, immigrant communities, so that we can assimilate ourselves more to their culture, and at the same time educating the consumer for them to be more ready and prepared and be mortgage ready as it's set up in the U.S. system.
I think you're talking about policy, if I'm hearing you correctly. So
part of that is definitely policy. Part of that is when you think about it from an underwriter guideline perspective, lenders will have some discretion as to what their risk appetite is going to be. We talked about the risk framework earlier. Lenders have a discretion of what the risk appetite is going to be.
John?
Can I comment, because that the word assimilation,
Yeah.
personally I have experience with that my parents are immigrants. They came to this country 18 years apart because of the Chinese Exclusion Act, but back in the 30s and my mom later in the 50s. Never learned to speak English till the day they died, because at that time you were stuck in Chinatown. You couldn't leave. My mom told stories of when you left Chinatown, you got beaten up. I mean, it was not a pleasant time. So when I went to kindergarten, not knowing a word of English, and had some challenges the first day because I didn't even know how to ask to go to the bathroom, we were told that you got to be American. You speak Chinese at Commodore Stockton School. You sat on the bench during recess. And my parents wanted me to become American so that I wouldn't go through the challenges they felt. And I honored that. I learned how to speak English. I still maintain Chinese because my parents didn't speak English. But to this day, in my name is not John. My name at birth was Jung, Jone, Yan Wong. My third grade teacher changed it to John because it sounded better. And my parents, rather than fight, went to Sacramento and changed my legal name to John. So my comment is that assimilation is important, but maybe a better path would be what this council is doing, what we're talking about, is having a broader understanding of the differences and recognizing where there are some parallels. One of the things that ARIA does, and together with NARREB, is on credit. That basically there are a lot of communities that don't follow the traditional U.S. credit, so don't have credit cards. Cash is really viewed as being more appropriate in their lives, so they don't have bad credit, they have no credit. So we're actively looking at expanding the definition of credit beyond FICO, looking at other ways to measure that now with technology can be demonstrated to be predictive. It's no longer just give me a break because I don't got it. I can show you that this actually works. And so I think that's the path that we have to take to kind of go through this.
Last week, I'm in Washington, D.C., and so I had to get the opportunity to go on the Hill too often, way too often. But there was a meeting last week with a combination of NARREB, the Hispanic community was there, and they were talking about housing and some of the discriminatory practices that are in existence today, as well as some of the challenges. One of the things I left with was that in 1968, black people owned more homes then than we do in 2019.
Say that again.
1968, we owned, as an African American community, we owned more homes in 1968 than we do in 2019. Now, if you're talking about, and I know we're going to speak about the wealth gap, you can't talk about creating wealth without talking about fixing the problems as it relates to home ownership. Home ownership gives you the ability to really create generational wealth. And so if you're keeping African Americans out of the number one opportunity to create that wealth, you're just going to continue to put us further behind. Right now, the average white family has wealth of about $172,000. Take away all your assets, all the liabilities, you'll still leave with a little less than $200,000. The average black family has $17,600. So when the recession hit, it hit us to the point where we lost everything. If you only got $17,000 worth of wealth and you have to get through a recession that may last more than 2 or 3 months, you're out of the game. That's what is happening. And so if we don't talk about policy as it relates to how to deal with housing, how to deal with discriminatory practices, how to deal with credit, on the credit side, I could be many of your bosses. I could have the same credit score or a higher credit score than you. We could be neighbors. We could have the same education, or I could have a higher level of education. I'm gonna go to the bank asking for $100,000. I may get 40. And as a black community, we leave saying, give me that 40, we'll make it work, because that's what we do as a community. And we know that that's only going to be a factor of failure. If I do get the loan, I'm going to pay twice the rate of my white peer that may have less credit, less education, and may work for me. Those are things that have not been discussed as it relates to policy. I can go and save all the funds I need. I can go and get a great education. A lot of folks think that the wealth gap is based upon women household led, or lack of education, or African Americans not saving. All of those are myths. We save more money based upon the income that we receive than any other community. We have a higher level of graduation rates than any other community other than Asian community currently in 2019 and 2018. And we still have $17,000 worth of wealth. It has nothing to do with us not being responsible lenders, nothing to do with us not paying our dollars back when we are provided the loans. There are policies and discriminatory actions that have nothing to do with my ability to be able to repay the loan.
I mean, you just segued right into my next question. My next question was, have you guys identified any non-inclusionary practices in your day-to-day work, and how do you deal with it?
Yes. And, you know, it's hard sometimes to be in a room to say this, because, John, you're with an Asian organization. Aren't you the guys who ruined the market with all these all-cash deals that raise prices? There is a segment that has applicability to, and in fact, most real estate practitioners of any heritage would say, man, I give me an all-cash deal, high price, I'll go for it because it's the logical business decision. But what that does, then it masks the rest of the Asian segment, and truly with every other segment, with inability to buy. Yeah. I think credit scoring is one of them. There are other ways to measure someone who doesn't, quote, have a credit card at Tiffany's to still be valid, to maybe check to see whether almost everyone has a cell phone. If they pay their mobile plans on a regular basis, and now you can track it much more easily with technology. If you pay your rent on time, it is not uncommon for somebody to pay a higher rent than what their mortgage payment would be and still not qualify. Mm-hmm. The challenge of just discrimination, there was some recent studies done that show that Asians are among the highest of being discriminated against. Really? And discrimination can take many forms. You can say, I won't show you the house. I mean, that historically has been true of the Asian segment. It's not as true now because everybody's looking for that crazy all-cash deal. But you're shown product that may be more expensive than you might be comfortable with, one. Two, you're shown stated income product that when you can qualify for something that is more reasonable based on your income,
And so you put the family at jeopardy because there's an assumption here. You guys don't know any better, just kind of go for it. So those are some of the practices that we see.
Right.
So when you talk about discrimination, you do have to look at, I think, this current administration. And so I've got a firsthand story for you. So the current administration, 3 days after they took over, a press release came out. And the press release said that the first agency that was going to be eliminated was the Minority Business Development Agency. And it was going to save the government $990 million. It was a 2-page press release. And the last paragraph said, well, they were going to also eliminate 2 other agencies. Well, the budget for the Minority Business Development Agency at the time was $37 million. The other 2 agencies made up the rest of the $990 million. But you know that minority at the very beginning of Business Development Agency, I think, had part of the reason why it was so pronounced. Okay, so that happened, and there are 47 minority business development agencies across the country, and they are responsible for identifying and trying to put people in contracts with the government, with local state agencies, also with corporations, but basically governmental kind of contracts. We're responsible for access to capital, not providing the capital, but by providing either the resource, the need, the connection, whatever you want to say, to get that capital. And I will tell you that businesses that come to MBDA for help in access to capital, they have robbed from Peter to pay Paul. They probably don't have the best books. It's not that they don't know their core and they're not good at what they do, but they may not have the best credit scores. Well, they don't. We're typically the last folks that they come to when they're looking for access to capital. And then if you have a center, you're also rated on how many jobs you provide or retain. So at our center, okay, in 2018, we assisted with $1.4 billion in contracts. And those contracts were not $25 million. Those contracts were anywhere from $500,000 and up. Okay, but we also assisted, as it relates to access to capital, $41.6 million went into the hands of MBEs that otherwise would not have been able to get those kind of dollars, leading to an impact of 304 jobs created or retained. That's just one center. Okay, there's 47. And yes, our center happens to be one of the outstanding centers in the country. Thank you very much. But those numbers are pretty solid across the board. The director of the MBDA went before Congress last month to talk about MBDA and the budget. So remember I said 3 days in, they tried to get rid of the program. And thank goodness for some of our Congress people around the country, because they looked at the value, they looked at the economic impact, and it got voted down. So when the director went to Congress last month, he had to say, you know, what was good about the organization. He did all of that. And then one of the congressional the speaker said, well, sir, how is it if you're making all of this progress that you want to cut $30 million out of a $40 million budget? What can your 47 centers possibly do with 10 million. That is destruction without the vote, okay? So those policies still exist, and there are people out there that don't want to see real, true economic impact to the minority community.
Yes. Excellent point. Excellent point. I mean, I can see so much fight on the ground roots level on policy that is fighting non-inclusionary practices. It seems to be even more so in the last year and a half. And I'm not going to get political about it, but that seems to be the case. And I know from John and Joe's side, from the housing side, you see it, and from the small to mid-sized businesses, I know Ron and Margot, you see that too. What can we do, and how can we partner to help bring attention to it, to help overcome it? Because we just can't throw in the towel and say, you know, it is what it is. How can we bring the voice to our local leaders, our regional leaders, and our national leaders to help get that back in line instead of going backwards, moving forward?
I think one of the good ideas is well, two of them. One is us coming together. When I go on Capitol Hill and I'm with other communities that are represented, it brings a different voice. It's not just a black concern, now it is an American concern.
Americans. Absolutely.
I think the second thing is really understanding some of the policies that are being introduced. A lot of people are excited about opportunity zones. And this is not a new philosophy. We've had zones for decades, and this is the newest opportunity zone that is supposed to be changing inner cities for the betterment. But if you really start to peel the onion back, you'll find that it really is detrimental to the stabilization of inner cities, of communities of color, and just cities in large. We were talking earlier, John lived in San Francisco, I grew up in Oakland, and our communities have changed so drastically that they're not the cities that we once knew. And it's not necessarily a positive thing, because many of those cities homed and housed minority communities that allowed them to be able to afford to send their children to public schools because they were paying taxes into a system that educated them, that allowed them to have good streets, good communities, good policing, because it was all done internally. Nowadays you have outside monies coming in, taking over communities, not really investing in the people as well as the communities. They're there for a profit and leave. And so you have seen cities like a Detroit, like a Chicago, like a Oakland that have changed, and although there may be cranes throughout the city that there is growth and there is reconstruction, the pulse of the city, the people of the city have all been displaced, and that cannot be good as it relates to stability in our communities, our families, and most importantly, for the folk that are now being displaced in those communities that many of them have no place to go.
So I'll speak to that, not so much from a policy perspective, but more as a community, let me say it that way. So two different perspectives that I've seen. Within Bank of America, there are hundreds of employee networks. And employee networks are represented by, it can be a specific ethnicity group. There is OLA, Hispanic Organization for Leadership Advancement. There's Lead for Women. There's the Asian group. There's just multiple interests. Over more than 100 employee networks within the company. These groups promote diversity and inclusion within the bank. These are employees that come together once a month. They have meetings and they have discussions. And one of the series that took place all across the company last year was what was called Courageous Conversations. And Vincent, that was a table, and there were small summits, some were small venues, some had hundreds of people, where the discussion was to have a courageous conversation, and perhaps it was around ethnicity, perhaps it was about race, but it was having the aptitude to sit at the table and have a conversation that may be a little bit uncomfortable. What is it that we grew up hearing? We don't talk about race, politics, religion, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so having the mindset of being able to sit at the table and have a courageous conversation has helped us be more aware and have a greater comprehension of what it's like. Leveraging the idealism, leveraging characteristics, leveraging talents, gifts, different perspective and thinking, create efficiencies around companies. So that's one, having literally courageous conversations. And you know what? We could take that at home. We could have that discussion at the dinner table. You could have that discussion at the next, dinner gathering that you're having with friends and family. Make sure that it's okay though, because it could get out of hand. But the second piece that I'll talk about, from a social perspective is NAREP in regards to education and empowerment has created through the Hispanic Wealth Project the mission to triple Hispanic household wealth. You talked about his wealth among the African American community, very similar within the Hispanic population, and the mission is to triple Hispanic household wealth in the next 10 years. We're already into year 3. And how we do that is there is an embracing what we call the NAREP 10. You talked about that at the beginning. And NAREP 10 is literally 10 principles that we are literally going around the country in communities all across, coaching and teaching families on how to adopt 10 principles that are going to help you build wealth. Simply, number one, having a mature understanding of prosperity. What is prosperity? Is prosperity having cars and shoes and just toys? Or is prosperity owning buildings,
generational
and homes
wealth
and assets? That's just an example of one of the principles. But that's a mission of going out and teach the basics of savings. Save 10% of what you got. Give to those that are less fortunate or less fortunate than you are. Maintain a sound, healthy family relationship with friends and family. So education, empowerment is one way that we turn this.
Absolutely, John.
And,
60 seconds.
And Vince, I recognize the light's on, but I've got to make a couple of statements because this is immediate. That it was addressed earlier about the net worth that a family has when it comes to home ownership. From the Federal Reserve, the average rental family that have been renters have a net worth of $5,400. The average net worth of a family that owns their home is $195,400, 36 times. Owning your home for the first time is a path towards sustainability and entry into the middle class. Now, how homeownership is made possible, and this organization here, the Veterans Administration Loan, was one of the ways that helped many folks get into homeownership for the first time. For others, it was Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac, which in addition to having the stability of being able to provide a 30-year fixed loan, also had a mission to help folks of any stripe to get in homeowners for the first time. After the crash, went into conservatorship, government's got it right now, and there's been a lot of discussions of how to bring it back out of conservatorship. There was the Johnson-Crapo bill and a lot of other geeky stuff. But what I'm sensing right now is that Director Calabria, who's the new head of FHFA, which oversees Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac, more and more stuff, it may happen faster than we think, is going to pull it out of conservatorship, go completely into the private sector, with just a bare mention of the mission of helping folks who are not yet in homeownership in the first time. If that happens, and I have many friends in the Mortgage Bankers Association, but if we leave it just to them and their shareholders driving the kind of loans that they make, interest rates are going to rise. And the underwriting criteria that help folks that are not yet into ownership is going to diminish on a high level. I'm in a meeting with stakeholders next about 10 days with Director Calabria to discuss this about how homeownership is important to the Asian segment. NARBA would be there, NAREP would be there. My concern right now is what I'm seeing in the news. Stuff is happening so quick, it's just like tax, it may happen faster than there's any input. And if what comes out of there doesn't have that core of what Fannie and Freddie had to help first-time homeownership, we're going to see a very, very different world, and our business is going to be very, very different.
So, to that point, I think that we have to have more collaboration. We have to build awareness of what's going on out there in the community. And you're right, things are moving so fast with a blink of an eye. Things will happen and you won't know it. When I talk about collaboration, because we do serve the 4 ethnic groups, I really do try to collaborate with all of my peers, whether it's the Asian chamber, Hispanic chamber, you name it, the council is going to be actively engaged. We think that public policy is really important and building awareness. So this last legislative session, we took about 150 minority-owned businesses down to Austin, and we had them meeting with representatives. Legislative folks are usually on the floor, but we introduced them to the chief of staffs, and we made them aware of issues that were of concern to our body, okay? And by doing that, okay, it's not just the Asian community that's concerned about this, or the Black community, or the Hispanic community. It's all of us. And so, to your point, we should be very concerned. We should be telling our stakeholders that they need to raise their voices because it impacts all of us, okay? We may not see it, you may not see it right now, but I guarantee you it's going to impact your pocketbook. And so we've got to do more collaborating, I think, and also build that awareness so our stakeholders know what's at risk so they can make that call. And if we have to write the letter for them, we can do that. But we've got to push that kind of information out. Otherwise, we don't know what's in store for us.
How many people heard a call to action? Raise your hand. We all need to get involved. We have 4 different organizations on this stage that are in the trenches and fighting on our behalf. Let's give them a round of applause.